Sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought with weapons, but with the courage to open a heart that's been closed for decades. Sometimes the most unexpected blessing comes in the form of a child who sees the father you never knew you could be. Nathan Cross, an Apache warrior, rides toward his mountain camp after years of fighting. He expects to find peace and solitude. Instead, he finds a 10-year-old girl named Ruby sitting by his fire. Her first words stop him cold. "You're going to be my father." She's the daughter of a woman from his past, one he never knew had a child. With nowhere else to go, she claims him as her own. What happens when a man who spent his life as a warrior suddenly finds himself chosen by a child who won't take no for an answer? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mountain air carried the scent of pine and approaching snow as Nathan Cross guided his weary horse up the familiar trail. 23 years of warfare had etched deep lines around his dark eyes and silvered the black hair that hung past his shoulders. His hands, scarred from countless battles, held the reins with the practiced ease of a man who had spent more time in the saddle than on solid ground. The Colorado Territory stretched endlessly below him, a vast expanse of rugged beauty that had witnessed the slow, painful death of his people's way of life. Nathan had fought in the Apache Wars, had watched his brothers fall one by one, had seen sacred lands carved up and handed to strangers who would never understand their true value. The weight of those losses sat heavy in his chest, a constant ache that no amount of time seemed to heal. His camp lay hidden in a grove of ancient pines, accessible only by a narrow deer path that wound through granite outcroppings and thick undergrowth. He had chosen this place deliberately, remote enough that no one would stumble upon it by accident, defensible enough that he could hold it against any threat. For 5 years, it had been his sanctuary, the one place on earth where he could strip away the mask of civilization and remember what it felt like to be truly Apache, the Ishum. First thing Nathan noticed as he crested the final ridge was the smoke. A thin column of gray spiraled up from where his fire pit should be cold and dead. Nathan's hand moved instinctively to the knife at his belt as he dismounted, his senses sharpening to combat readiness. In all the years he had used this camp, no one had ever found it. The possibility that someone had discovered his refuge sent ice through his veins. He moved through the trees like the ghost his enemies had once called him, every footfall silent on the carpet of pine needles. The smell of burning wood grew stronger, mixed with something else, something that made him pause in confusion. Coffee. Real coffee. Not the bitter chicory most people made do with on the frontier. Nathan crept to the edge of the clearing and stopped dead. A child sat beside his fire pit, tending the flames with the casual confidence of someone completely at home. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old, with long dark hair braided down her back and skin that spoke of mixed heritage, Apache and something else, maybe Mexican or Spanish. She wore a simple brown dress that had seen better days and a pair of worn leather boots that were too big for her feet. More shocking than her presence was her demeanor. Most children would have been terrified to be alone in the wilderness, but this girl sat with her back straight and her chin lifted, stirring something in a battered tin pot, as if she had every right to be there. A small leather pouch rested beside her on a flat stone, worn smooth by countless hands. Nathan stepped into the clearing, his rifle held ready but not aimed. The girl looked up at him with eyes the color of dark honey, and her face broke into a smile that was equal parts relief and determination. "You're Nathan Cross," she said. "Not a question, but a statement of fact. And you're trespassing on my land," Nathan replied, his voice rough from disuse. The girl stood up, and Nathan was struck by how small she was, how fragile she looked against the vast wilderness that surrounded them. But there was nothing fragile about the way she met his gaze, nothing childish about the set of her shoulders. "My name is Ruby," she said. "Ruby Martinez. And you're going to be my father." The words hit Nathan like a physical blow. He stared at her, waiting for the punchline or the explanation that would make sense of what she had just said. When neither came, he shook his head slowly. "I think you've made a mistake, child. I don't know who you are or how you found this place, but my mother was Isabella Martinez," Ruby interrupted. "She said you knew her. She said you knew her very well." The name stopped Nathan cold. Isabella. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 15 years, but the memory of her face was as clear as if he had seen her yesterday. Dark eyes that laughed even when her mouth was serious. Hands that could gentle a wild horse or stitch a wound with equal skill. A voice that had whispered his name in the darkness of a cabin in Santa Fe, before duty and honor had torn them apart. "Isabella is dead," Ruby continued, her voice steady despite the pain that flickered across her young face. "She died 3 months ago from the fever. Before she passed, she told me to find you. She said you were the only man she ever trusted, the only one who would keep me safe." Nathan felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Isabella gone. And this child, this brave, impossible child, was her daughter. His mind raced, calculating dates and possibilities. 15 years since he had last seen Isabella. Ruby appeared to be 10, maybe 11 years old. "Your father," Nathan began, "is dead too," Ruby said simply. "Killed by raiders when I was 7. It's been just me and Mama since then, until the fever took her." She picked up the leather pouch and held it out to him. "She left this for you. Said it would explain everything." Nathan's hands shook as he took the pouch. Inside, he found a letter written in Isabella's careful script and a small turquoise stone that he recognized immediately. He had given it to her the last night they had spent together, before his duties as a warrior had called him back to his people, and hers as a wife had bound her to another man. The letter was brief, but devastating in its honesty. Isabella had loved her husband, she wrote, but she had never forgotten Nathan. When her daughter was born, she had seen Nathan's eyes looking back at her, Nathan's stubborn chin, Nathan's quiet strength. She had never told Ruby who her real father was, but she had always known that if something happened to her, Nathan was the only man she would trust with her daughter's life. "She's not yours by blood," the letter concluded, "but she is yours by choice. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone and Ruby has found her way to you. Please, Nathan, she has no one else. Be the father to her that life never allowed you to be to your own children." Nathan's vision blurred as he finished reading. His own children. The son who had died in the cholera outbreak when he was barely walking. The daughter who had been stillborn the winter before the wars began. Isabella had known about them, had understood the empty ache in his chest that no amount of fighting could fill. He looked up to find Ruby watching him with those honey-colored eyes, waiting for his verdict with the patience of someone far older than her years. "How did you find me?" he asked. "Mama drew me a map," Ruby said. "Told me about the trail markers and the hidden spring. She said you taught her to read the land the way other people read books." Nathan nodded slowly. He had done that, during the brief months when their paths had crossed. Isabella had been curious about everything, eager to learn the skills that had kept him alive in the wilderness. He had never imagined she would pass that knowledge on to her daughter. "It's dangerous for a child to travel alone," Nathan said. "I'm not just any child," Ruby replied with a small smile, "and I had help. The priest in Taos gave me supplies and told me which roads to avoid. A rancher's wife fed me and let me sleep in her barn. People are kinder than you might think, especially to a little girl traveling alone." Nathan studied her face, seeing Isabella's determination mixed with something uniquely her own. This child had crossed hundreds of miles of dangerous territory to find him, guided by nothing but a crude map and her mother's stories. The courage that must have required was staggering. "You can't stay here," Nathan said finally. "This isn't a place for children. Then where do you suggest I go?" Ruby asked, her voice still calm, but with an edge of steel underneath. "I have no family left. No money, no home. You can send me away if you want, but I'll just keep coming back. Mama said you were honorable. She said you never abandoned anyone who needed your help." Nathan closed his eyes, feeling the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders like a familiar yoke. He had come to this mountain to escape responsibility, to live out his remaining years in solitude. Instead, he had found a child who needed him more than anyone had ever needed him before. When he opened his eyes, Ruby was still watching him, still waiting. The fire crackled between them, and somewhere in the distance a nighthawk called across the darkening sky. 1 week, Nathan said. You can stay for 1 week while I figure out what to do with you. Ruby's smile was radiant. Thank you. As Nathan unsaddled his horse and settled in for what he suspected would be a very long night, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just changed irrevocably. The child, Ruby, had claimed him with a certainty that brooked no argument. And despite every instinct that told him to run, he found himself curious about what came next. The wind picked up, rattling the pine branches overhead, and Nathan caught the scent of snow again. Winter was coming early this year. Perhaps it was time to stop running from the cold. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with frost coating the pine needles like tiny crystals. Nathan woke to the smell of cooking meat and the soft sound of Ruby humming to herself. He had spent the night in his usual spot, beneath an overhang of rock, but sleep had come in fragments, broken by the unfamiliar presence of another person in his sanctuary. Ruby knelt beside the fire, turning strips of venison on a makeshift spit. She had found his cache of dried meat and had somehow managed to make it into something that actually smelled appetizing. More impressive still, she had banked the fire properly through the night, a skill that took most people years to master. You're awake, she said, without turning around. I made breakfast. Nathan sat up slowly, his joints protesting the cold mountain air. Where did you learn to cook like that? Mama taught me. She said a person who can't feed themselves properly won't last long in hard country. Ruby handed him a portion of the meat wrapped in a clean cloth. She taught me lots of things. How to read weather, how to find water, how to tell if someone's lying by watching their eyes. Nathan accepted the food and took a bite. It was perfectly seasoned, with wild herbs he hadn't even noticed growing around the camp. And what do my eyes tell you? Ruby studied his face with an intensity that was disconcerting in someone so young. That you're scared, she said simply. Not of me, but of what I represent. You've been alone for a long time, and you're afraid of what it might mean to care about someone again. The accuracy of her observation caught Nathan off guard. He chewed slowly, buying time to formulate a response that wouldn't reveal how deeply her words had struck home. Your mother, he said finally. Tell me about her last days. Ruby's expression grew solemn, but she didn't look away. The fever came fast. One day she was fine, the next she could barely stand. The doctor in town said there was nothing to be done, except wait and pray. She lasted 2 weeks, Nathan nodded. He had seen enough death to know how cruel fever could be, how it could steal away the strongest person in a matter of days. She talked about you near the end, Ruby continued. When the fever made her confused, she would call out your name. She would tell stories about a warrior who could move through the forest like a ghost, who could track a man across solid rock. She said you saved her life once in Santa Fe, Nathan remembered. Isabella had been caught in the crossfire between 2 rival gangs, trapped in a burning building with no way out. He had risked his own life to get her to safety, carrying her through smoke and flames while bullets whined overhead. She had been married to someone else even then, but for one night they had pretended that didn't matter. She kept this hidden for 15 years, Ruby said, pulling a folded piece of paper from her pocket. It was different from the letter in the pouch, older, yellowed with age. She made me promise to give it to you only if you agreed to let me stay. Nathan took the paper with hands that trembled slightly. As he unfolded it, he recognized Isabella's younger handwriting, less careful but more passionate than the controlled script of her final letter. My dearest Nathan, by the time you read this, I will be gone, and our daughter will be in your care. Yes, our daughter. I know I told you she wasn't yours, but I lied. I lied because I was afraid, because my husband was a good man who didn't deserve betrayal, because I thought I could protect everyone by keeping the truth buried. Ruby is your blood, Nathan. Born 9 months to the day after our last night together. She has your eyes, Your courage, your stubborn refusal to back down from what's right. She has your heart, even though she's never known you. I tried to be enough for her, but I see now that she needs more than I could give. She needs to know where she comes from. She needs to understand the warrior's blood that flows in her veins. Most of all, she needs a father who can teach her to be strong in a world that will try to break her. I'm sorry I never told you. I'm sorry I robbed you of 10 years with your daughter. But I'm not sorry for loving you, and I'm not sorry for the child that love created. Take care of her, Nathan. Love her. She's the best part of both of us. Forever yours, Isabella. The letter fell from Nathan's nerveless fingers. He stared at Ruby, his daughter, seeing her with new eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw that he recognized from his own reflection. The way she held herself, straight and proud despite her small stature. The careful way she watched everything around her, missing nothing. You knew, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ruby nodded. Mama told me the truth before she died. She said my other father was a good man who loved me, but you were my blood father. She said I had a choice to make. Stay in Taos and try to make it on my own, or find you and claim my heritage. Nathan felt the world spinning around him. A daughter? He had a daughter, alive and healthy and sitting 3 feet away from him. The child he had mourned, the family he had thought was lost forever, had been living and breathing all this time. The map, he said suddenly. You said she drew you a map to find me. Ruby reached into her pack and pulled out a worn piece of leather. When she unfolded it, Nathan saw not just directions to his camp, but detailed notes about his habits, his preferred routes, even the location of his backup supplies. Isabella had been watching him, somehow keeping track of his movements, even after all these years. She never stopped loving you, Ruby said softly. She would take me to the high places sometimes, where you could see for miles, and she would tell me about the Apache warrior who taught her to read the wind. She said if anything ever happened to her, I should find you and tell you she never forgot the promise you made under the stars in Santa Fe. Nathan's breath caught. The promise. He had sworn to Isabella that night that he would always protect her, always be there when she needed him. Life had torn them apart before he could keep that vow, but here was his chance to honor it at last. She drew this map from memory. Ruby continued, tracing the route with her finger. Every landmark, every water source, every safe place to camp. It took me 3 weeks to get here, but I never got lost. Not once. Nathan thought about that journey, a 10-year-old girl traveling alone across some of the most dangerous territory in the West. Guided only by her dead mother's memories and her own incredible determination. The courage it must have taken was beyond comprehension. Why didn't you tell me last night? Nathan asked. Because I wanted you to choose me for who I am, not because you felt obligated by blood, Ruby said. Mama said the best fathers aren't always the ones who sire children, but the ones who choose to love them. I needed to know you would want me even if I wasn't yours. Nathan stared at his daughter. He could finally use that word, finally claim her, and felt something crack open inside his chest. For 15 years, he had carried the weight of loss like a stone in his heart. His children, dead before they could know life. His people scattered and broken. His purpose stolen by a war that had no winners. But here was Ruby, alive and strong, and his. Here was a chance to be more than just a warrior, more than just a survivor. Here was a chance to be a father. The blood-stained map, Nathan said suddenly, remembering the dark stains on the leather. Ruby's expression grew grim. Not my blood. 3 men tried to take it from me near Pueblo. They thought I was just a lost child with something valuable. They were wrong. Nathan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. What happened to them? I let them think I was helpless, Ruby said simply. Then I used the knife Mama taught me to carry. Only one of them was really hurt, but it was enough to make them think twice about following a little girl into the canyon country. Nathan stared at her in amazement. This child, his child, had defended herself against 3 grown men and lived to tell about it. The warrior blood ran true in her veins. Ruby, he said carefully, what do you want from me? I want you to teach me, she said without hesitation. Teach me to track like you do. Teach me to move through the forest without sound. Teach me the Apache ways that Mama could only describe in stories. I want to learn everything you know, so I can be worthy of being your daughter." Nathan felt his last wall crumble. The fear, the resistance, the desperate desire to maintain his solitude, all of it fell away in the face of his daughter's fierce determination. "You're already worthy," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You've been worthy since the moment you were born." Ruby's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "So I can stay? Really stay?" Nathan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Ruby launched herself at him, wrapping her thin arms around his neck in a hug that nearly knocked him over. He held her carefully, afraid she might break, amazed by how perfectly she fit against his chest. "I won't let you down," Ruby whispered against his shoulder. "I promise I'll make you proud." Nathan closed his eyes and held his daughter close, feeling the first stirrings of something he had thought was dead forever. Hope, purpose, love. The wind picked up again, but this time it didn't feel cold. This time it felt like a fresh start. The first lesson began that very afternoon. Nathan led Ruby to a stream that wound through the valley below their camp, its water crystal clear and cold enough to numb fingers in seconds. He knelt beside the muddy bank and pointed to a set of tracks pressed deep into the soft earth. "What do you see?" he asked. Ruby crouched beside him, studying the prints with the intensity she brought to everything. "Deer," she said after a moment. "A doe, I think, based on the size. She was moving fast. See how deep the front hooves dug in? She was running from something." Nathan nodded approvingly. "Good, what else?" Ruby circled the tracks, examining them from different angles. "She was here this morning. The edges of the prints are still sharp, but there's a little bit of dew settling in the bottom, and—" She paused, tilting her head. "She was favoring her left front leg. The print's not as deep on that side." "Excellent," Nathan said, and meant it. Many experienced trackers would have missed that subtle detail. "What does that tell you about her condition?" "She's injured, but not badly. Probably just a stone bruise or a minor cut. She'll recover, but for now she's vulnerable." Ruby looked up at Nathan with eyes that sparkled with intelligence. "Which means she'll stick close to water and avoid open ground where predators might spot her." Nathan felt a swell of pride that caught him off guard. This child, his daughter, had a natural gift for reading the land that couldn't be taught. It could only be nurtured and refined. "Your mother taught you well," he said. "She taught me to observe," Ruby replied. "But you're going to teach me to understand. There's a difference, isn't there?" Nathan stood and brushed the mud from his knees. "Show me." For the next hour, Ruby demonstrated what Isabella had passed on. She could identify tracks, read weather signs, and navigate by the sun. But Nathan could see the gaps in her knowledge, the subtle details that meant the difference between competence and mastery. "You see the tracks," Nathan said as they walked back toward camp. "But do you hear the story they tell?" Ruby frowned. "What do you mean?" Nathan stopped beside a fallen log and pointed to a series of overlapping prints in the dirt. "The doe came through here twice. Once yesterday evening, moving slow and easy. Once this morning, running hard." "What changed?" Ruby studied the tracks again, and Nathan could almost see her mind working. Something spooked her. But what? "Look beyond the tracks," Nathan advised. "What else do you see?" Ruby's gaze swept the area, taking in the disturbed earth, the broken twigs, the scuff marks on the bark of nearby trees. Slowly, understanding dawned on her face. "Men," she breathed. "Men on horseback came through here early this morning. 3 of them, maybe 4. They were tracking the doe." "How do you know they were tracking her?" "Because their path follows hers. And because," Ruby pointed to a spot where the undergrowth was trampled, "one of them dismounted here. See the boot print?" He was examining her tracks, just like we were. Nathan nodded. And they gave up when they realized she was heading for the thick timber. The horse tracks turned back toward the main trail. Ruby looked up at Nathan with growing excitement. They weren't hunting for meat. They were hunting for sport, and when it became too much work, they quit. "Very good," Nathan said. "Now you're beginning to understand. Tracks don't just tell you what passed by. They tell you why and where they were going and what they were thinking." Ruby pulled a small wooden object from her pocket and turned it over in her hands. It was a doll, carved with simple tools but obvious care. The face was worn smooth by countless caresses, and one of the arms had been carefully repaired with sinew. "My mama made this for me when I was little," Ruby said, noticing Nathan's curious look. "I know I'm too old for dolls now, but it helps you remember her," Nathan finished. Ruby nodded, suddenly looking very young. "I hid it from you last night. I was afraid you'd think I was just a baby." Nathan reached out and gently touched the carved wood. "A warrior keeps the things that matter close to his heart." "There's no shame in that." Ruby's smile was radiant. She tucked the doll back into her pocket with obvious relief. As they climbed back toward camp, Nathan found himself studying his daughter with new eyes. She moved through the forest with surprising grace for someone so young, placing her feet carefully and avoiding the dry branches that would snap and give away her position. Isabella had taught her well, but there was something more, an instinct that couldn't be learned. "Tonight," Nathan said as they reached the clearing, "I'll show you how to set snares. Tomorrow we'll work on moving silently. By the end of the week, you'll be able to walk through dry leaves without making a sound." "What about fighting?" Ruby asked. "Will you teach me to fight like you do?" Nathan paused in the act of adding wood to the fire. "What makes you think I can fight?" Ruby gave him a look that was far too knowing for her years. "Mama told me stories about the Apache warrior who could disappear into shadows and strike like lightning. About the man who once held off 20 soldiers with nothing but a knife and his wits." Nathan sat heavily on a log, feeling the weight of his reputation settling on his shoulders. "Fighting is a last resort, Ruby. A wise warrior avoids conflict whenever possible. But sometimes you can't avoid it," Ruby said, with the pragmatism of someone who had already faced violence. "Sometimes people try to hurt you just because you exist." Nathan thought about the men who had tried to take her map, about the journey that had brought her to him. This child had already seen more hardship than most adults, had already been forced to defend herself against those who would prey on the innocent. "Yes," he said finally, "sometimes you can't avoid it. And when that time comes, you need to be ready." Ruby nodded seriously. "Then teach me, please." Nathan studied her face, seeing determination mixed with genuine need. This wasn't the bloodthirst of youth. This was the practical recognition of someone who understood that the world could be dangerous, especially for a young girl traveling alone. "We'll start with awareness," Nathan said. "The best fight is the one you never have to finish, because you saw it coming from miles away." As the sun set behind the mountains, they shared their first real meal together. Nathan showed Ruby how to prepare the rabbit he had snared that morning, teaching her which parts were best for eating and which could be used for other purposes. Nothing was wasted. Bones for tools, sinew for thread, hide for repairs. "The land provides everything we need," Nathan explained as they worked, "but only if we know how to ask politely." Ruby watched his hands as he demonstrated the proper way to skin the animal, her attention absolute. "Mama used to say that the Apache were the only people who truly understood how to live with the desert instead of fighting it." "Your mother was a wise woman," Nathan said. "The desert doesn't care if you're Apache or Mexican or Anglo. It will kill you just as dead if you don't respect it." As they ate, Ruby told him about her life in Taos, the small house she had shared with Isabella, the garden they had tended together, the neighbors who had looked after her when her mother was working. It had been a good life, simple but full of love. "I miss her," Ruby said quietly as the fire burned down to coals. "I miss her voice in the morning, and the way she would hum while she cooked, and how safe I felt when she was near." Nathan felt his heart clench. "She's still with you," he said. "In the things she taught you, in the way you carry yourself, in the courage that brought you to me. That never goes away." Ruby wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Will you tell me about your people? About what it means to be Apache?" Nathan stared into the fire, seeing faces from his past dancing in the flames. His father, who had taught him to ride before he could properly walk. His grandfather, who had shown him the sacred places where spirits walked. his brothers in arms, who had died fighting for a way of life that was already fading into memory. "Tomorrow," he promised. "Tomorrow I'll tell you everything." As Ruby curled up in her blankets near the fire, Nathan sat watching the darkness, listening to the night sounds of the forest and thinking about the responsibility that had been placed in his hands. He had thought his fighting days were over, that he had given all he had to give. But perhaps this was a different kind of battle, not against an enemy, but for something worth preserving. His daughter's steady breathing told him she felt safe enough to sleep deeply. For now, that would have to be enough. Ruby's fever started on the 4th day. Nathan noticed it first as a flush in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the crisp morning air. She moved more slowly than usual as they broke camp for a hunting lesson, and when he touched her forehead, her skin burned against his palm. "I'm fine," Ruby insisted, but her voice lacked its usual strength. Nathan didn't argue. Instead, he guided her back to their shelter and made her lie down on his own bedroll, the one with the thick wool blanket that would hold heat better than her thin covering. By noon, she was shivering despite the fever, her teeth chattering so hard he could hear them from across the clearing. Nathan knelt beside her and pulled the sacred medicine bundle from his pack, a collection of herbs and healing objects that his grandfather had passed down to him. Wrapped in soft deer skin and blessed with the prayers of generations, he hadn't used these medicines in years, hadn't even been sure he remembered the proper rituals. But as he unwrapped the bundle and saw the familiar packets of willow bark and sage, the knowledge came flooding back, as if his grandfather's voice was whispering in his ear. Nathan built the fire higher and set water to boil in his largest pot. While it heated, he sorted through the herbs, selecting the ones he needed for fever and chills. White willow bark for pain and temperature, sweet grass for purification, cedar for strength and protection. "What are you doing?" Ruby asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Making medicine," Nathan replied, crushing the willow bark between 2 stones. "Apache medicine. My grandfather taught me these remedies when I was about your age." Ruby watched with fever-bright eyes as he prepared the tea, following rituals that were older than memory. The sweet, earthy smell of the herbs filled the air, mixing with the smoke from the fire, to create an atmosphere that felt sacred and safe. When the tea was ready, Nathan helped Ruby sit up and held the cup to her lips. She drank without complaint, though he could see her struggling to keep the bitter liquid down. "Rest now," Nathan said, gently pushing her back down onto the bedroll. "The medicine needs time to work." For the next 2 days, Nathan barely left her side. He fed her sips of tea every few hours, bathed her fevered brow with cool water from the stream, and kept the fire burning through the cold mountain nights. When she shivered, he added more blankets. When she was too hot, he opened the shelter flaps to let in the cool air. Ruby drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid enough to ask for water, sometimes delirious enough to call for her mother. During those moments, Nathan would hold her hand and speak softly in Apache, the old words of comfort that his own mother had used when he was sick as a child. On the 2nd night of the fever, Ruby's temperature spiked so high that Nathan began to fear he might lose her. She thrashed in her sleep, crying out in Spanish and English, her small body burning like a coal in the fire. Nathan gathered her in his arms and carried her to the stream, wading into the icy water until it reached his waist. The shock of the cold water made Ruby gasp and open her eyes. For a moment, she stared at him in confusion, as if she didn't recognize where she was or who was holding her. "It's all right," Nathan murmured, supporting her weight as the stream flowed around them. "I've got you. You're safe." The cold water worked. Ruby's fever broke with almost miraculous suddenness, leaving her weak but clear-headed. Nathan carried her back to the shelter and wrapped her in dry blankets, then sat beside her as she slept peacefully for the first time in days. When Ruby woke the next morning, her eyes were clear and her skin was cool to the touch. She looked around the shelter, taking in the scattered medicine packets and the worried lines around Nathan's eyes. "You stayed with me," she said, her voice still hoarse from the fever. "Where else would I go?" Nathan replied. Ruby struggled to sit up, and Nathan quickly moved to help her. "I remember some of it. You singing to me in Apache. Holding my hand when I was scared, Nathan felt his cheeks warm. My grandfather used to sing those songs when I was sick. They're supposed to help the spirits find their way back to the body. Did they work? Nathan looked at his daughter, alive, alert, and asking questions, and felt a wave of gratitude so powerful it nearly knocked him over. You tell me, Ruby managed a weak smile. I think they did. As Ruby recovered over the next few days, Nathan found himself marveling at the changes in their relationship. The crisis had stripped away the last of his reservations about accepting responsibility for her. She wasn't just a duty anymore, or even just his daughter. She was someone he couldn't imagine living without. Ruby seemed to sense the shift as well. She began asking more personal questions about his past, about the family he had lost, about the battles he had fought. And Nathan found himself answering with an honesty that surprised him. Tell me about your children, Ruby said one evening as they sat by the fire. The ones who died. Nathan was quiet for so long that Ruby began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft with old grief. My son was named Little Wolf. He would have been 24 this year, probably married with children of his own. He died when he was 2, during the cholera outbreak that swept through our village. My daughter... Nathan paused, his throat tight with emotion. My daughter was never born alive. We called her Morning Star because she came with the dawn. But she never drew breath. Ruby moved closer to Nathan, her small hand finding his. I'm sorry. For 15 years, I thought that was all I would ever have. 2 children who never had the chance to grow up, never had the chance to learn the things a father should teach. Nathan looked down at Ruby's hand in his. And then you came walking into my camp with your mother's eyes and your own fierce heart, and suddenly I have a daughter again. Do you think they would have liked me? Ruby asked. Little Wolf and Morning Star? Nathan smiled, the first genuine smile Ruby had seen from him since her fever broke. Little Wolf would have followed you around like a puppy, begging you to teach him how to throw knives and track deer. And Morning Star... He touched Ruby's cheek gently. She would have been your shadow, copying everything you did and insisting she was old enough to do it too. Ruby's eyes filled with tears, but they were good tears. I wish I could have known them. In a way you do, Nathan said. Every time you show courage, every time you refuse to give up, you're honoring their memory. The love I couldn't give them, I can give to you. As Ruby's strength returned, Nathan began teaching her more advanced skills. He showed her how to move through the forest without disturbing so much as a leaf, how to read the wind for information about what lay ahead, how to find food and medicine in plants that most people would dismiss as weeds. But more than skills, he taught her stories. Stories about their people, about the sacred places that had been home to the Apache for countless generations. About the warriors and wise women who had shaped their heritage. We are the Chiricahua, Nathan told her as they worked together to repair a torn piece of her dress. The mountain people. Our ancestors learned to read the desert the way other people read books, to find water where there seemed to be none, to survive in places that would kill the unprepared. And now I'm one of them, Ruby said, threading the needle with careful precision. You always were, Nathan replied. You just didn't know it yet. One afternoon, as Ruby practiced moving silently through the undergrowth, she stopped suddenly and held up her hand in the signal Nathan had taught her for danger. Nathan froze, every sense alert, and followed her gaze to a point where the trees thinned out near the stream. 3 men on horseback sat at the edge of the clearing, their eyes scanning the forest. They were armed and looked like the kind of men who were comfortable with violence. Nathan recognized the type, drifters and opportunists who made their living preying on the weak and isolated. Ruby crept back to Nathan's side, moving with a silence that would have impressed a full-blooded Apache warrior. The same men, Nathan whispered. Ruby shook her head. Different ones, but the same kind. Nathan studied the riders, noting their weapons, their horses, the way they held themselves. They were looking for something, or someone. The question was whether they were here by coincidence or design. The men dismounted and began examining the ground near the stream, clearly following tracks. After a few minutes, One of them pointed toward the trail that led up to Nathan's camp. They had found Ruby's footprints from that morning, when she had gone down to fill their water containers. Nathan felt a familiar calm settle over him, the battle focus that had kept him alive through countless conflicts. But this time it was different. This time, he wasn't just fighting for his own survival. He was protecting his daughter. He touched Ruby's shoulder and jerked his head back toward their camp. Moving like ghosts, they slipped through the forest, leaving no trace of their passage. Nathan's mind raced as he considered their options. The camp was well hidden, but if the men were determined trackers, they would eventually find it. Back at their shelter, Nathan quickly gathered their most essential supplies, while Ruby rolled up the bedding and scattered the ashes of their fire. In less than 10 minutes, the camp looked abandoned. "Where are we going?" Ruby whispered as Nathan shouldered his pack. "Higher," Nathan replied. "There's another place I know, one that's easier to defend." As they climbed toward the secondary camp, Nathan felt a mixture of pride and fear. Pride in how quickly and efficiently Ruby had responded to danger, how naturally she had fallen into the rhythm of evasion and escape. Fear because her very competence reminded him of how much she had already endured, how much danger might still lie ahead. The sun was setting by the time they reached Nathan's backup shelter, a small cave hidden behind a waterfall that few people would ever think to explore. As they settled in for the night, Ruby finally asked the question that had been weighing on both their minds. Will they keep coming? "Been like that?" Nathan was quiet for a long time, staring out at the moonlight dancing on the water. "Probably," he said finally. "A young girl traveling alone, especially one who's proven she can take care of herself. That's the kind of thing that attracts attention from the wrong sort of people. Then we'll have to be ready for them," Ruby said with a calm determination that took Nathan's breath away. Nathan looked at his daughter, seeing in her face the same fierce resolve that had carried her across hundreds of miles of dangerous territory to find him. She wasn't asking him to protect her from the world. She was asking him to teach her how to stand against it. "Yes," he said, "we will." That night, as Ruby slept peacefully beside the hidden fire, Nathan kept watch and wondered what kind of world he was preparing her for. But when he looked at her sleeping face, lit by the gentle glow of the flames, he knew it didn't matter. Whatever came, they would face it together. For the first time in 15 years, Nathan Cross was no longer alone, and he would die before he let anyone take that away from him. 2 weeks later, the past came hunting for Nathan Cross. Ruby spotted them first. 3 riders moving up the main trail with the purposeful pace of men who knew exactly where they were going. She and Nathan were returning from checking their snare lines when she touched his arm and pointed toward the distant figures. Nathan pulled out his field glasses, a relic from his army days, and studied the approaching men. His blood ran cold as he recognized the leader, Marcus Webb, a bounty hunter with a reputation for never giving up once he took a contract. The man beside him was younger, but moved with the same predatory confidence. The third rider hung back slightly, suggesting he was either new to this kind of work or smart enough to be cautious. "Do you know them?" Ruby asked, reading the tension in Nathan's body. "The one in front," Nathan said, lowering the glasses. "His name is Webb. He's been hunting me for 3 years. Ruby's eyes widened. "Why?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment, weighing how much truth a 10-year-old could handle. But Ruby had already proven she was stronger than most adults, and she deserved to know what kind of danger she was in. "During the war, I did things that some people consider crimes," Nathan said carefully. "Webb has a federal warrant with my name on it. Dead or alive, it makes no difference to him." "What kind of things?" Ruby pressed. Nathan closed his eyes, seeing faces from the past. Soldiers who had died by his hand, settlements that had burned, families that had been torn apart by the violence that consumed everything in its path. "I killed men who were trying to kill my people," Nathan said finally. "I raided supply trains that were carrying weapons to be used against Apache villages. I burned bridges and cut telegraph lines, and did whatever I could to slow down the war machine that was destroying everything I loved." Ruby was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Were you wrong to do those things? Nathan opened his eyes and looked at his daughter, seeing no judgment in her face, only genuine curiosity. I don't know, he admitted. At the time, it felt like the only choice I had. Now I wonder if there might have been another way. But you were protecting your family, Ruby said. Your people. That's what warriors do. Nathan felt something ease in his chest. This child understood in a way that few people ever would. The impossible choices that war forced on good men. The question now, Nathan said, is what we do about Webb and his friends. Ruby pulled a battered object from her pocket, a compass that had belonged to her adoptive father, the man who had raised her until the raiders came. The needle spun wildly, never settling on true north, making it more of a keepsake than a tool. We could run, Ruby said, studying the broken compass as if it might provide answers. Head deeper into the mountains, find somewhere they'll never think to look. Nathan nodded. That's one option. What's another? Ruby looked up at him, with eyes that were far too knowing for her age. We could stay and fight, make them wish they'd never heard your name, and risk getting you killed in the process, Nathan said. No, I won't have that on my conscience. Then we run together, or we fight together, Ruby said firmly. But we don't split up. That's what families do. They stick together no matter what. Nathan felt his heart clench at the simple certainty in her voice. She was right, of course. They were family now, bound by something stronger than blood or law or the violent history that had brought them together. There's a third option, Nathan said slowly, an idea beginning to form in his mind. We could make them think we've already run, lead them on a chase that takes them far away from here. A false trail, Ruby said, understanding immediately. Make them follow tracks that lead nowhere. Exactly. But it would be dangerous. If they caught us in the deception, they won't, Ruby said with quiet confidence. You taught me well. We both know this country better than they do. Nathan studied his daughter's face, seeing determination mixed with excitement. This wasn't the reckless bravado of youth. This was the calculated courage of someone who understood the stakes and was willing to accept them. We'd have to split up, Nathan said. You'd take one route, I'd take another. Make them think we're traveling together, but always stay far enough apart that if one of us is caught, the other can escape. Ruby's hand moved instinctively to the knife Nathan had given her the week before, his backup blade, the one he'd carried through a dozen battles. It was too big for her small hands, but she was learning to use it with deadly efficiency. How long would we have to stay apart? Ruby asked. A few days, maybe a week. Long enough to lead them into the deep country where they'll either give up or get lost. Ruby nodded slowly. I can do that. I won't like it, but I can do it. Nathan felt a surge of pride so strong it nearly knocked him over. This child, his child, was offering to face mortal danger to help him escape the consequences of his past. The courage that required was staggering. We'll start tonight, Nathan said. Create 2 sets of tracks leading in different directions. They'll have to choose which one to follow, and while they're chasing shadows, we'll circle back and meet at the old trading post near Rabbit Creek. Ruby grinned. And for a moment she looked like exactly what she was, a 10-year-old girl excited by the prospect of adventure. It's a good plan. It's a desperate plan, Nathan corrected. But sometimes desperate plans are the only ones that work. As they made their way back to camp, Nathan found himself thinking about the changes the past month had brought. When Ruby first appeared at his fire, he had been a man with nothing left to lose. Now he had everything to lose, and the weight of that responsibility was both terrifying and exhilarating. Ruby seemed to sense his thoughts. Are you sorry? She asked quietly. Sorry that I found you? Sorry that your life got complicated again? Nathan stopped walking and turned to face her. Ruby, he said, his voice rough with emotion, finding you was the best thing that's happened to me in 15 years. Whatever comes next, whatever we have to face, I want you to remember that. Ruby's smile was radiant. I will. That evening, as they prepared for what might be their last night together for some time, Nathan taught Ruby the final lesson she would need for the journey ahead. Fear, he said as they sat by the carefully shielded fire, is not your enemy. Fear keeps you alive, keeps you sharp, keeps you making smart decisions instead of brave ones. What's the difference? Ruby asked. A brave decision is one that feels good in the moment. A smart decision is one that keeps you breathing long enough to make another one. Ruby nodded solemnly. Be smart, not brave. Be both, Nathan corrected. But be smart first. As the night deepened and the time came to begin their deception, Nathan looked at his daughter and felt his heart break a little. She was so young, so small against the vast darkness of the wilderness. But she was also strong and clever and more capable than most grown men he had known. See you at Rabbit Creek, Ruby said, shouldering her pack. See you at Rabbit Creek, Nathan replied, and then she was gone, disappearing into the shadows like the ghost her Apache blood had taught her to be. Nathan waited until he could no longer hear her footsteps, then set out on his own false trail, drawing the hunters away from the most precious thing in his world. The game had begun. The reunion at Rabbit Creek came 3 days later, and it was everything Nathan had hoped for and more. He arrived first, emerging from the pine forest just as the sun was setting behind the western peaks. The old trading post was exactly as he remembered it, a cluster of abandoned buildings, slowly being reclaimed by the wilderness, but still solid enough to provide shelter from the wind and rain. Nathan had barely finished checking the perimeter when he heard a soft whistle from the trees, the Apache signal Ruby had learned to perfection. Moments later, she stepped into the clearing, moving with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to live as part of the forest itself. Any trouble? Nathan asked, though he could already see the answer in her confident smile. None at all, Ruby replied. They followed my trail for about 10 miles before they figured out it was a dead end. Last I saw them, they were arguing about which direction to search next. Nathan felt a deep satisfaction settle in his chest. The plan had worked perfectly, but more than that, Ruby had executed her part with the skill of a seasoned warrior. She was becoming everything he had hoped she could be. Your turn, Ruby said, settling beside the small fire Nathan had built in the shelter of the largest building. How did Webb take the bait? Like a starving trout, Nathan said with grim amusement. He followed my trail all the way to Devil's Canyon before he realized I'd doubled back. By then, his horses were played out and his men were ready to quit. Ruby pulled out the hunting knife Nathan had given her and began cleaning it with the methodical care he had taught her. The blade gleamed in the firelight, and Nathan was struck by how natural it looked in her hands. I've been thinking, Ruby said as she worked, about what you said before, about not knowing if there was another way. During the war, I mean. Nathan waited, sensing that she was working up to something important. I think maybe there wasn't another way then, Ruby continued. But there might be now. A way to make peace with your past, Nathan frowned. What do you mean? Ruby set down the knife and looked at him directly. Webb isn't going to stop hunting you. Men like that never do. But what if instead of always running, we found a way to make him want to stop? Ruby, you can't negotiate with a man like Webb. He's not interested in justice or truth or anything except the bounty on my head. I'm not talking about negotiating, Ruby said. I'm talking about showing him who you really are. Not the Apache warrior from the stories, but the man who saved me. The father who teaches his daughter to track deer and read the wind. Nathan shook his head. It doesn't work that way. The warrant has my name on it, and that's all Webb cares about. Maybe, Ruby said. But what if we could show him that Nathan Cross isn't the same man who fought in the Apache wars? What if we could prove that you've changed? Nathan stared at his daughter, amazed by the depth of her thinking. She was only 10 years old, but she was already grappling with concepts that had eluded him for years. How would we do that? Nathan asked, curious despite himself. Ruby was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing patterns in the dirt beside the fire. I don't know yet, but I know there has to be a way. People change, and sometimes the law changes too. Maybe we just need to find the right person to listen. Nathan felt something stir in his chest, not hope exactly, but the possibility of hope. For years he had accepted that he would always be running, always looking over his shoulder, always one step ahead of the past that refused to let him go. But Ruby was suggesting something different. She was suggesting that redemption might be possible. "You really believe that?" Nathan asked. "I believe in you," Ruby said simply. "And I believe that good people shouldn't have to spend their whole lives paying for things they did to protect the people they loved." Nathan reached out and touched her cheek, feeling the smoothness of youth and the strength that lay beneath it. "When did you get so wise?" Ruby smiled. "I had a good teacher." Over the next few days, as they traveled deeper into the high country to put distance between themselves and Webb's hunting party, Nathan found himself thinking about Ruby's words. The idea of making peace with his past seemed almost impossible, but she had planted a seed that refused to stop growing. More than that, he was beginning to see the full extent of Ruby's transformation. The frightened child who had appeared at his campfire was gone, replaced by someone who moved through the wilderness with confidence and skill. She could track game, find water, navigate by the stars, and defend herself if necessary. But more importantly, she had learned to think like a warrior, not just reacting to threats, but anticipating them and planning for them. "Show me the knife work again," Nathan said one afternoon as they practiced in a secluded clearing. Ruby drew the blade with fluid precision, the steel singing as it left the sheath. She moved through the forms Nathan had taught her: thrust, parry, slash, withdraw, each movement controlled and purposeful. "Good," Nathan said. "But remember, the knife is a tool of last resort. If you're close enough to use it, something has already gone wrong." "I know," Ruby said, sliding the weapon back into its sheath. "But if something does go wrong, I want to be ready." Nathan nodded approvingly. This was the thinking of a true warrior. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst, and never assume that good intentions were enough to keep you safe. That evening, as they sat around their campfire, sharing a meal of fresh trout and wild greens, Ruby asked the question that had been building between them for weeks. "Will you teach me the Apache ceremonies?" she said. "The real ones, the sacred ones that your grandfather taught you?" Nathan felt his breath catch. The ceremonies were more than just traditions. They were the spiritual heart of his people, the connection between the living and the dead, the bridge between the physical world and the realm of spirits. "Those ceremonies are not taught lightly," Nathan said carefully. "They carry responsibilities that last a lifetime." "I understand," Ruby said. "But I am Apache now, aren't I? Your daughter by blood and by choice. Don't I have the right to know the ways of my people?" Nathan stared into the fire, seeing the faces of his ancestors dancing in the flames. His grandfather, who had passed down the sacred knowledge with such care. His father, who had died before Nathan could teach him everything he needed to know. The children he had lost, who would never learn the old ways at all. "Yes," Nathan said finally. "You do have that right. But once you begin learning, there's no going back. The spirits will know you, and they will expect you to honor the obligations that come with that knowledge." Ruby's expression was solemn but determined. "I'm ready." Nathan reached into his pack and pulled out a bundle wrapped in soft deerskin, the sacred objects that his grandfather had entrusted to him decades ago. As he unwrapped them, revealing eagle feathers and carved bones and stones worn smooth by countless ceremonies, he felt the weight of tradition settling on his shoulders. "Then we begin tonight," Nathan said, "under the full moon, as my grandfather began with me." As the moon rose over the mountains, Nathan began passing down the knowledge that had sustained his people for generations beyond counting. He taught Ruby the songs that called the spirits, the prayers that honored the four directions, the rituals that marked the passage from child to adult. Ruby listened with the intensity she brought to everything, asking questions when she didn't understand, repeating the words until she could speak them without thinking. And Nathan felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of knowing that the old ways would not die with him. "This is who we are," Nathan said as the ceremony concluded and the fire burned down to embers. "This is what it means to be Apache. Not the wars or the defeats or the reservations, but this connection to the land and the spirits and each other." Ruby nodded, her face glowing with something that went beyond happiness. She had found her heritage, her identity, her place in the great chain of being that stretched back to the beginning of time. "Thank you," she whispered. Nathan pulled her close, holding his daughter under the star-filled sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, new decisions that would shape both their futures. But tonight, they were complete. A father and daughter bound by love and blood and the ancient wisdom of their people. The wind rustled through the pines, carrying the scent of snow and the promise of winter. But Nathan no longer felt the cold. He had found his purpose again, and it was sitting right beside him, wrapped in moonlight and infinite possibility. The wanted poster changed everything. Ruby found it nailed to a tree near their water source, the parchment fluttering in the morning breeze like a trapped bird. Nathan was checking their snares when her sharp whistle brought him running, his hand automatically moving to his knife. "What is it?" Nathan asked, scanning the forest for signs of danger. Ruby stood frozen beside the pine tree, staring at something Nathan couldn't see from his angle. Her face had gone pale and her hands were trembling slightly. "Ruby!" Nathan moved closer, worry evident in his voice. Without a word, Ruby stepped aside, revealing the poster tacked to the bark. Nathan's blood turned to ice as he read the carefully printed words, "Wanted, dead or alive. Nathan Cross, Apache warrior and known associate of Isabella Martinez. Reward, $500 crimes. Murder, robbery, conspiracy. Against the United States, last seen, Colorado territory," but it was the smaller text at the bottom that made Nathan's world tilt on its axis. Cross is believed to be responsible for the death of Isabella Martinez and may be traveling with her daughter. Exercise extreme caution. Subject is considered armed and extremely dangerous. Ruby's voice was barely a whisper. "They think you killed my mother." Nathan ripped the poster from the tree, his hands shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "This is wrong. This is all wrong, is it?" Ruby asked, and something in her tone made Nathan's heart stop. He turned to face her, seeing doubt flickering in those honey-colored eyes for the first time since she had claimed him as her father. "Ruby, you can't believe—" "Tell me the truth," Ruby said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "Tell me the real truth about you and my mother." Nathan crumpled the poster in his fist, his mind racing. How could he explain 15 years of history in a way that would make sense to a 10-year-old child? How could he make her understand the complex web of duty and desire, love and loyalty that had defined his relationship with Isabella? "Sit down," Nathan said, gesturing to a fallen log. "This is going to take a while." Ruby remained standing, her small frame rigid with tension. "Just tell me, did you hurt her, ever?" "No," Nathan said without hesitation. "I loved your mother, Ruby. I would have died before causing her harm." Some of the tension left Ruby's shoulders, but her eyes remained wary. "Then why does that poster say you killed her?" Nathan sat heavily on the log, suddenly feeling every one of his 53 years. "Because 15 years ago, I was sent to bring your mother back to face charges for helping Apache raiders escape from a cavalry patrol." Ruby's eyes widened. "Mama was a criminal. Your mother was a saint who couldn't stand to watch innocent people suffer," Nathan corrected. "She had been working as a translator for the army, but when she saw what was really happening to the Apache prisoners, the beatings, the starvation, the deliberate cruelty, she started helping them escape." Nathan paused, seeing that night in Santa Fe as clearly as if it were happening again. The burning buildings, the screaming horses, the smoke that had turned the stars invisible. I was a tracker then, working for the territorial government. They sent me to find Isabella and bring her back for trial. But when I found her, Nathan shook his head. When I found her, I realized that everything I thought I knew about the war was wrong. "What do you mean?" Ruby asked, her curiosity overriding her suspicion. "I saw the conditions in that prison camp. I saw children starving, elderly people dying from preventable diseases, warriors beaten unconscious for the crime of asking for water." Nathan's voice grew rough with old anger. "And I saw your mother risking her life every night to bring them food and medicine, to help the ones she could save escape to freedom." Ruby was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "So you helped her instead of arresting her?" "I fell in love with her," Nathan said simply. With her courage, her compassion, her absolute refusal to turn away from suffering just because it was convenient. She changed me, Ruby. She made me see that sometimes the law and justice aren't the same thing. And then what happened? Nathan closed his eyes, remembering the weight of the decision that had changed the course of his life. I falsified my report, told my superiors that Isabella Martinez had died in a fire, that there was no body to recover and no evidence to pursue. As far as the government knew, she was dead. Ruby's breath caught. You made her disappear. I set her free, Nathan corrected. Free to marry your adoptive father, free to raise you in peace, free to live the life she deserved. But why didn't you go with her? Ruby asked. If you loved her so much, why didn't you just leave together? Nathan opened his eyes and looked at his daughter, seeing Isabella's intuitive intelligence shining back at him. Because I was still a warrior, and my people were still fighting for their lives. I couldn't abandon them, not even for love. Ruby was quiet for several minutes, her young mind working through the implications of what Nathan had told her. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and uncertain. So you really are my father? By blood, I mean, Nathan nodded. The timing fits. 9 months after our last night together, you were born. Isabella must have realized the truth, but chose to protect you by letting her husband believe you were his. And now someone thinks you killed her. Ruby held up the crumpled poster. Why? Nathan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Because someone figured out that Isabella Martinez didn't really die 15 years ago. And when she actually died 3 months ago, they assumed I was responsible. Who would do that? Who would want to frame you? Nathan thought about the men who had hunted him over the years, the enemies he had made during the war, the people who might benefit from seeing him hanged for a crime he didn't commit. I don't know, Nathan admitted. But whoever it is knows enough about my past to make the charges believable. Ruby moved closer to Nathan, her earlier doubt replaced by fierce protectiveness. We have to clear your name. We have to prove you didn't hurt Mama. Nathan looked at his daughter, marveling at her loyalty, even in the face of such devastating revelations. Ruby, do you understand what this means? If people believe that poster, if they think I'm a murderer who preys on innocent women and children, no one will help us. No one will listen to our side of the story. Then we make them listen, Ruby said with the quiet determination that never failed to amaze Nathan. We find whoever is spreading these lies, and we make them tell the truth. Nathan pulled the second letter from his pack, the one Isabella had written just before her death, the one that explained everything. He handed it to Ruby, watching her face as she read her mother's final words. My dearest Nathan, if you're reading this, then Ruby has found you, and you know the truth about everything. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner about our daughter. Sorry I couldn't give you the years with her that you deserved. But I need you to know that I never regretted loving you. Never regretted the choice we made together. You gave me the most precious gift in the world, our brave, beautiful girl. And you gave me 15 years of life that I wouldn't have had otherwise. The man who raised Ruby was good to both of us, but he was never her true father. That was always you, Nathan. She has your heart, your courage, your stubborn refusal to give up when the odds are against you. Take care of her. Teach her the Apache ways. Help her understand that she comes from a long line of warriors and survivors. And if anyone ever tries to use our past against you, know that I forgive you for everything, and I regret nothing. All my love. Always. Isabella Ruby wiped tears from her cheeks as she finished reading. She loved you. Even after all those years apart, she still loved you. Nathan felt his own eyes burning. And I loved her. Every day of the 15 years we were apart, I loved her. Ruby stood up and walked to the edge of the clearing, staring out at the vast wilderness that stretched to the horizon. When she turned back to Nathan, her face was set with new resolve. We're going to find out who's behind that poster, she said. And we're going to make sure everyone knows the truth about Nathan Cross. Nathan stood and put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. It won't be easy. People want to believe the worst about men like me. Then we'll have to be better than they expect, Ruby said. We'll have to show them that the Nathan Cross they're hunting doesn't exist anymore. Nathan looked down at his daughter, seeing strength and determination that went far beyond her years. She was right, of course. Running would only confirm their guilt in the eyes of those who wanted to believe the lies. If they were going to clear his name and build a future together, they would have to stand and fight. "All right," Nathan said. "We do this together. But first, we need to figure out who wants me dead badly enough to frame me for murder," Ruby smiled. And Nathan caught a glimpse of the woman she would one day become, fierce, intelligent, and absolutely unstoppable. "I think I might have an idea about that," Ruby said. "But you're not going to like it." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Try me. What if it wasn't someone from your past who made that poster?" Ruby asked. "What if it was someone from mine?" The realization hit Nathan like a physical blow. Ruby's past, her adoptive father's past, was something they had barely discussed. He had assumed that part of her life was settled, finished, buried with the man who had raised her. But Ruby's expression told him he had been dangerously naive. "Tell me," Nathan said, settling back onto the log and preparing himself for another revelation that would reshape everything he thought he knew. Ruby sat beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Papa, my adoptive father, wasn't just a rancher like Mama always said. He used to be a lawman, a federal marshal." Nathan felt ice form in his veins. "Used to be. He was killed 3 years ago by a gang he'd been tracking. The leader got away, but Papa had wounded him badly. Before he died, Papa made Mama promise that if anything ever happened to her, she would never let me fall into the hands of certain people." "What people?" Ruby pulled a small piece of paper from her pocket. Another letter, this one written in a man's careful script. "Papa wrote this the night before he rode out after the gang. He must have known he might not come back." Nathan took the letter with hands that weren't quite steady. The paper was worn from being folded and refolded countless times, suggesting that Isabella had read it often over the past 3 years. "My dear Isabella, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're facing the world alone. I pray that day never comes. But a man in my profession learns to plan for the worst. There are things about my past I never told you, things I hoped would stay buried. But if something happens to me, you need to know the truth, especially about Ruby. The gang I've been tracking is led by a man named Cornelius Thorne. He's not just a criminal, he's a collector. He collects people who owe him debts, people who have crossed him, people who have something he wants. And 3 years ago, I made the mistake of taking something that belonged to him. Money, Isabella. A lot of money that Thorne had stolen from a silver mine payroll. I recovered it during a raid, and instead of turning it all in as evidence, I kept enough to buy our ranch and give us the life we'd always dreamed of. Thorne knows what I did. He knows about you, about Ruby, about everything we've built together. If he's still alive when you read this, he'll come for what's his. And he'll use Ruby to get it. The money is hidden in the old root cellar beneath the house. If Thorne comes calling, give it to him. Don't try to fight him. He's not the kind of man who can be reasoned with or bargained with. Just give him what he wants and pray he leaves you in peace. But if something happens to you too, if you can't protect Ruby yourself, there's only one man I trust to keep her safe. Nathan Cross. He's wanted by the law, but he's a good man who lost his way during a bad war. Isabella, you never told me the truth about Ruby's real father, but I'm not blind. I've seen his eyes looking back at me from her face since the day she was born. Find Nathan Cross. He's the only one with the skills and the motivation to keep our girl safe from men like Thorne. Take care of yourself, my love, and take care of our daughter. Forever yours. Marcus Nathan read the letter twice, his mind racing as he processed the implications. Ruby's adoptive father had been a federal marshal who had stolen money from a dangerous criminal. That criminal was still out there, still hunting for what had been taken from him. And somehow, that hunt had led to Nathan being framed for Isabella's murder. "Thorne," Nathan said finally. "You think this Cornelius Thorne is behind the wanted poster?" Ruby nodded grimly. "It makes sense, doesn't it? Mama died of fever, but what if Thorne was in town when it happened? What if he saw an opportunity to kill two birds with one stone, get revenge on Papa's family, and eliminate the one man who might be able to protect me? Nathan felt the pieces clicking into place like the mechanism of a well-made rifle. Frame Nathan Cross for murder, put a bounty on his head, and let other bounty hunters do the dirty work. Meanwhile, Thorn could focus on tracking down Ruby and recovering his stolen money. The root cellar, Nathan said. Did your mother ever give Thorn his money back? Ruby shook her head. She tried to. After Papa died, she wrote letters to every lawman she could think of, trying to find out how to return stolen money to its rightful owners. But no one would help her. They said without Papa's testimony, there was no way to prove where the money came from or who it belonged to. So Thorn never got his money back. And now he thinks I know where it is, Ruby said. Which I do. Mama showed me the hiding place before she died, made me promise I'd never tell anyone about it unless... She paused, looking at Nathan with eyes that held far too much knowledge for someone her age. Unless I found you. Nathan stood and began pacing the small clearing, his mind working through strategy and tactics the way it had during his military days. So Thorn wants his money back, and he wants revenge on the Marshall's family. But he can't just grab you off the street because people would ask questions. So he frames me for your mother's murder, puts a bounty on my head, and waits for someone else to kill me and bring you in as a witness. Except I'm not a witness, Ruby said. I'm his real target. Once he has me, he can make me tell him where the money is hidden. Nathan stopped pacing and looked at his daughter, seeing the fear she was trying so hard to hide beneath her brave facade. How much money are we talking about? Papa's letter said it was a silver mine payroll. Enough to buy a ranch and live comfortably for years. Ruby's voice was small. Mama thought it might be $10,000. Maybe more, Nathan whistled low. That was enough money to buy a small army. Enough to make men do terrible things for just a chance at claiming it. And Thorn had been hunting for it for 3 years. Where is it now? Nathan asked. The money, I mean? Still in the root cellar, as far as I know. Mama was too scared to go back to the ranch after Papa died. We moved to town and lived on what little savings we had. Nathan felt the weight of decision settling on his shoulders. They could run, could disappear into the deep wilderness, and hope Thorn never found them. But that would mean always looking over their shoulders, always wondering when the past would catch up with them, or they could face this threat head-on. The way warriors were meant to face their enemies. We're going back, Nathan said suddenly. Ruby's eyes widened. Back where? To your ranch. To the root cellar. If Thorn wants his money so badly, maybe it's time he got it. You want to give it back to him? Ruby asked, confusion evident in her voice. Nathan smiled grimly, and for a moment the old warrior showed through the facade of the gentle father. I want to use it as bait. Understanding dawned on Ruby's face. A trap. The oldest kind, Nathan confirmed. We let Thorn know where his money is, and we wait for him to come collect it. Only when he arrives, he'll find more than he bargained for. Ruby was quiet for a long moment, considering the plan. It's dangerous. If something goes wrong, we'll face it together, Nathan said. But I'm tired of running from other people's lies. It's time to end this. Ruby stood and walked to Nathan's pack, pulling out the sacred war paint that his grandfather had given him decades ago. She held it out to him with both hands, her expression solemn. Then we do this the Apache way, she said. We paint for war. Nathan took the clay and ochre with hands that trembled slightly. He hadn't worn war paint in years, hadn't felt the power of the old rituals since the last battle of the Apache Wars. But as he mixed the pigments with water from the stream, he felt something awakening in his chest. Not the young man's hunger for violence, but the mature warrior's commitment to protect what mattered most. The paint went on like a prayer, each stripe and symbol carrying the weight of tradition and the promise of victory or death. When Nathan was finished, he looked at his reflection in the still water of the stream and saw his grandfather's face looking back at him. Now you, Nathan said, offering the paint to Ruby. Ruby's eyes went wide. I'm not a warrior yet. I haven't earned the right. You've traveled hundreds of miles alone to find your father. Nathan said gently. "You've faced down grown men who tried to harm you. You've learned the sacred ways and accepted the responsibilities that come with them. If you're not a warrior yet, you're close enough for this fight, with infinite care." Nathan painted the traditional symbols on Ruby's face, the markings that would tell the spirits she was under his protection, that her courage was acknowledged by her people, that she stood ready to face whatever came. When he was finished, they stood together at the edge of the stream, a father and daughter transformed by ritual and purpose into something more than human. They were Apache warriors, ready to defend their family and their honor against any threat. "How long will it take to reach the ranch?" Nathan asked. 2 days hard riding, if we can find horses," Ruby replied. 3 days on foot, Nathan nodded. "Then we'd better get moving. Thorn has had 3 years to plan his revenge. We'll need every advantage we can get." As they broke camp and prepared for the journey that would determine both their fates, Nathan found himself thinking about the strange path that had brought them to this moment. A month ago, he had been a man with nothing left to lose. Now he had everything to lose, and somehow that made him stronger rather than weaker. Ruby moved beside him with the silent efficiency they had developed over weeks of traveling together. She was no longer the frightened child who had appeared at his campfire. She was his partner, his daughter, his reason for fighting. The sun was climbing toward its zenith as they set out on the trail that would lead them back to Ruby's past and toward a confrontation that had been building for 3 years. Nathan touched the knife at his belt and felt the familiar calm of a warrior who had chosen his ground and was ready to make his stand. Behind them, the mountains stretched toward the sky like the backbone of the world. Ahead lay danger and uncertainty and the possibility of death, but also the possibility of freedom, of justice, of a future where Nathan Cross was no longer a hunted man and Ruby Martinez could grow up without fear. It was a chance worth fighting for, worth dying for if necessary. The war paint felt tight on Nathan's face as he smiled. After 15 years of running from his past, he was finally ready to turn and face it head-on. Let Cornelius Thorn come. Let him bring all the hired guns and bounty hunters and federal marshals he could afford. When the shooting started, he would discover that framing an innocent man had been the last mistake he would ever make. The Apache warrior was going home. The abandoned ranch looked exactly as Ruby had described it, a cluster of weathered buildings slowly being reclaimed by the high desert, surrounded by the ghosts of dreams that had died with the man who built them. Nathan and Ruby approached on foot, having left their horses tied in a grove of cottonwoods 2 miles back. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the overgrown yard, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk circled on the thermal currents rising from the heated earth. "The house is there," Ruby whispered, pointing to a structure that had once been painted white, but was now grey with age and neglect. "The root cellar is around back, beneath the kitchen floor." Nathan studied the layout with the eyes of a tactician. The house sat in the center of a natural clearing, with good sight lines in all directions, but very little cover for anyone approaching. The barn and outbuildings formed a rough semicircle to the east, providing potential hiding spots, but also places where enemies could take cover. "If I were setting an ambush," Nathan murmured, "I'd put men in the barn and behind the corral fence. Maybe one on the roof of the house, if the structure can support it." Ruby followed his gaze, seeing the tactical situation through her father's eyes. "And if I were Thorn, I'd already be here waiting," Nathan nodded grimly. They had pushed hard for 2 days to reach the ranch, but there was no guarantee they had arrived first. Thorn had resources, money, men, connections in the law enforcement community. He could have been watching this place for weeks. "The signal fire," Ruby said suddenly. "Remember what you taught me about drawing enemies into a trap?" Nathan smiled, remembering the lesson from their weeks in the mountains. "Make them think they have the advantage, then turn their strength against them. What if we lit a signal fire on that ridge?" Ruby pointed to a rise about 1/2 mile south of the ranch. "Made it look like we were camping there for the night, planning to approach the house in the morning." Nathan considered the idea. It was risky. If Thorn's men were already in position, a signal fire might provoke them into attacking before Nathan and Ruby were ready. But it might also draw them away from the house, giving the two of them a chance to approach unseen. It could work, Nathan said slowly. But we'd need to split up again. One of us lights the fire and maintains it, while the other approaches the house. I'll take the fire, Ruby said immediately. Nathan shook his head. Too dangerous. If they send men to investigate, they won't send men, Ruby interrupted. They'll send one man, maybe two at most. Thorn can't afford to reduce his strength at the house, and he knows you're too smart to camp in the open unless you have a good reason. Nathan started to argue, then stopped. Ruby was right, and they both knew it. She had proven herself capable of handling dangerous situations, and this plan played to her strengths: stealth, patience, and the ability to disappear into the landscape when necessary. All right, Nathan said reluctantly. But at the first sign of trouble, you abandon the fire and run. Don't try to be a hero. Ruby's smile was fierce. I learned from the best. I'll be a smart warrior, not a brave one. As the sun touched the western horizon, they put their plan into motion. Ruby made her way to the ridge, carrying supplies for a small fire, and enough gear to make it look like a genuine campsite. Nathan circled wide to approach the ranch from the north, moving through the scattered juniper and sage with the silent precision that had made him a legend among his enemies. The first sign that they weren't alone came when Nathan was still 200 yards from the nearest building. A horse whickered softly in the barn, answered by another animal somewhere near the house. Too many horses for a place that was supposed to be abandoned. Nathan bellied down behind a fallen log and studied the ranch through his field glasses. At first glance, everything looked normal. Weathered wood, broken windows, weeds growing in the yard. But as his eyes adjusted to the failing light, he began to pick out the details that didn't belong. A glint of metal in the barn loft. The subtle wrongness of a shadow that moved when the wind didn't blow. The barely visible outline of a man crouched behind the corral fence. 3 men, maybe 4, armed and positioned to catch anyone approaching the house in a crossfire. Professional work, which meant Thorn had brought experienced killers rather than local toughs looking for easy money. Nathan eased back from his observation point and considered his options. He could wait for full darkness and try to take out the sentries one by one, but that would leave Ruby exposed on the ridge for hours. Or he could create a distraction that would force Thorn's hand and give Ruby a chance to escape if things went badly. The decision was made for him when he saw the thin column of smoke rising from the ridge where Ruby had positioned herself. She had lit the signal fire right on schedule, and it wouldn't be long before Thorn's men noticed it. Nathan was moving toward the barn when he heard the soft whistle that meant Ruby was in trouble. He froze, every sense straining to locate the source of the danger. The whistle came again, followed by the sound of horses moving through the brush near the ridge. Thorn had indeed sent men to investigate the fire, but more men than Nathan had expected. The plan was falling apart, and Ruby was caught in the open with nowhere to run. Nathan abandoned stealth and sprinted toward the barn, his rifle ready and his mind calculating angles and distances. If he could neutralize the men guarding the house quickly enough, he might be able to reach Ruby before Thorn's scouts found her. The first shot came from the barn loft, a rifle bullet that whined past Nathan's ear and buried itself in the dirt behind him. Nathan dove behind a water trough and returned fire, his shot punching through the boards of the loft and drawing a cry of pain from the hidden gunman. The man behind the corral fence opened up with a pistol, the shots coming fast but wild in the uncertain light. Nathan rolled to his left and put 2 quick rounds through the fence posts, rewarded by the sound of a body hitting the ground. That left at least one more man somewhere near the house, and probably Thorn himself. Nathan reloaded quickly and tried to spot his remaining enemies, but the deepening shadows made it nearly impossible to distinguish between threats and harmless objects. Another whistle from the ridge, this one sharper and more urgent. Ruby was calling for help, and Nathan was pinned down with no clear way to reach her. The sound of breaking glass came from the house, followed by the flicker of lamplight in one of the windows. Someone was moving around inside, probably searching for the entrance to the root cellar. Nathan made his choice. He couldn't fight on two fronts simultaneously, and Ruby was in immediate danger. The money would have to wait. He fired 3 quick shots at the house windows to keep Thorne's attention focused on him, then turned and ran toward the ridge where his daughter was making her stand. Behind him, he heard shouting and the thunder of hooves as the remaining gunmen mounted up to pursue him. The signal fire was visible now as an orange glow against the darkening sky. As Nathan got closer, he could see Ruby crouched behind a cluster of boulders, her rifle trained on something he couldn't see from his angle. "Ruby!" Nathan called as he approached her position. 2 men, Ruby called back without taking her eyes off her targets. They came up the backside of the ridge. "I think I wounded one of them, but they have me pinned down." Nathan could see the tactical situation immediately. Ruby had chosen good cover, but she was trapped on the high ground with limited ammunition and no easy escape route. The 2 men hunting her had taken position in a fold of ground about 50 yards below her. Close enough to keep her under fire, but far enough away to make accurate shooting difficult in the failing light. "Stay put," Nathan ordered. "I'm coming around behind them." Nathan worked his way down the slope, using every scrap of cover the rocky ground provided. The men hunting Ruby were focused on her position, their attention fixed on the muzzle flashes from her rifle as she traded shots with them. They never saw Nathan coming until it was too late. The first man died with Nathan's knife between his shoulder blades, his surprised gasp lost in the sound of gunfire from above. The second man turned, just in time, to see Nathan emerging from the shadows like a vengeful spirit, war paint stark against his weathered face. The man tried to bring his rifle around, but Nathan was faster. His shot took the gunman in the chest, spinning him around and dropping him beside his dead partner. "Clear!" Nathan called to Ruby. Ruby rose from her hiding place, her rifle still ready but her stance more relaxed. "Is that all of them?" "Not even close," Nathan replied grimly. "Thorne's still at the house, and he might have more men coming. We need to—" The sound of hoofbeats cut him off. 3 riders were approaching at a gallop, silhouetted against the dying light. But these weren't Thorne's men. They were coming from the wrong direction, and they were riding hard like men with urgent news to deliver. Nathan raised his rifle, then lowered it as he recognized the lead rider. Marcus Webb, the bounty hunter who had been chasing him for 3 years, was riding toward them with 2 companions and no sign of hostile intent. "Nathan, cross," Webb called as he reined in his horse. "We need to talk." Nathan kept his rifle trained on Webb but didn't fire. Something about the bounty hunter's posture and tone suggested this wasn't the confrontation Nathan had been expecting for 3 years. "Talk fast," Nathan said. "I've got a man down at the ranch who wants to kill me and my daughter." Webb dismounted slowly, his hands visible and empty. "That's what I came to tell you about. The warrant, the one with your name on it for killing Isabella Martinez. It's fake." Ruby stepped closer to Nathan, her own weapon ready. "How do you know?" "Because 3 hours ago, a federal marshal named Tom Bradley arrested the man who forged it," Webb replied. "Cornelius Thorne. Turns out he's been wanted for a lot more than just robbery and murder." Nathan felt the world shift beneath his feet. "Thorne's been arrested?" "Not exactly," Webb said grimly. "He was arrested, but he escaped during transport. Killed 2 deputies and wounded a 3rd. Bradley thinks he's headed here." Nathan lowered his rifle slightly. "Why should I believe you?" Webb reached slowly into his saddlebag and pulled out a folded document. "Because I've got the real warrant here. The one that clears you of all charges related to Isabella Martinez's death." Ruby took the document from Webb and unfolded it in the fading light. Her face lit up as she read the official language that declared Nathan Cross innocent of murder and officially pardoned for his actions during the Apache Wars. "It's real," Ruby breathed. "Papa, it's real." Nathan felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he had carried for so long he had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. "How did this happen?" "Bradley's been investigating Thorne for months," Webb explained. When the wanted poster with your name surfaced, he recognized it as Thorne's work. Apparently, Thorne has a history of framing innocent people to throw law enforcement off his trail. The sound of gunfire from the direction of the ranch interrupted them. Muzzle flashes flickered in the windows of the house, and the sharp crack of rifles echoed across the desert. "Thorne's men," Nathan said. "They must be fighting each other, or Thorne just arrived and found his sentries dead," Webb finished. "Either way, he's probably figured out that you're not where he expected you to be." Nathan made a quick decision. "Webb, if you want to earn that bounty money legitimately, now's your chance. Help me take Thorne alive, and I'll make sure the federal marshals know who delivered him." Webb smiled grimly. "I was hoping you'd say that. I've been chasing the wrong man for 3 years. Time to set things right." The 4 adults and Ruby made their way down from the ridge toward the ranch house. As they got closer, the situation became clearer. Thorne had arrived with at least 2 more men, but finding his sentries dead had made him paranoid. The gunfire they heard was Thorne's men shooting at shadows, jumping at every sound and movement. "He's scared," Ruby observed quietly. "Good. Scared men make mistakes." Nathan looked at his daughter with pride. Even in the middle of a dangerous situation, she was thinking tactically, analyzing their enemy's weaknesses and looking for advantages. "There," Webb whispered, pointing to a figure moving between the barn and the house. "That's Thorne. I'd recognize him anywhere." Nathan studied the man through his field glasses. Cornelius Thorne was smaller than he had expected, but he moved with the controlled violence of a professional killer. He was directing his men to search the outbuildings, clearly looking for any sign of Nathan and Ruby. "He doesn't know we're here yet," Nathan said. "But it won't take him long to figure out we're not in that house." "What's the plan?" Webb asked. Nathan thought quickly. They had surprise on their side, but Thorne had more men and better defensive positions. A direct assault would be costly, and there was too much risk that Ruby could be hurt in the crossfire. "Ruby," Nathan said, "I want you to take that eagle feather I gave you and get back to a safe distance. If this goes bad—" "No," Ruby interrupted firmly. "We do this together, remember? All of us, or none of us." Nathan started to argue, then saw the determination in his daughter's eyes. She wasn't going to be left behind, and trying to force her would only create more problems. "All right," Nathan said. "But you stay with Webb's men and provide covering fire. No heroics." Ruby nodded and moved to position. Herself with Webb's companions, behind a low stone wall that offered good cover and clear sightlines to the house. Nathan and Webb approached the ranch buildings from different angles, moving through the darkness like the experienced hunters they were. The plan was simple: get close enough to force Thorne into surrender, and hope his remaining men would give up rather than die for a lost cause. They were within 50 yards of the house when everything went wrong. A door slammed open, and Thorne himself stepped onto the front porch, a rifle in his hands and a lit stick of dynamite in the other. "Nathan Cross!" Thorne shouted into the darkness. "I know you're out there. Come out now, or I'll blow this whole place to hell." Nathan felt his blood turn to ice. If Thorne set off that dynamite near the house, the explosion would likely collapse the root cellar and bury the evidence of his crimes forever. Worse, the blast might be large enough to injure Ruby and the others, despite their distance from the building. "What do you want, Thorne?" Nathan called back, not revealing his position. "I want what was stolen from me," Thorne replied. $15,000 that your girlfriend's husband took from a mine payroll 3 years ago. "The money's in the root cellar," Nathan said. "Take it and go," Thorne laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Oh, I'll take it. But first, I'm going to finish what I started. You cost me 3 years of my life, Cross. 3 years of running and hiding and planning my revenge. That has to be paid for in blood." Nathan could see that reasoning with Thorne was useless. The man was beyond rational thought, consumed by a need for vengeance that had twisted him into something barely human. But Nathan also saw something else: the slight tremor in Thorne's hands as he held the dynamite, the way his eyes darted constantly from shadow to shadow. Webb had been right. Thorne was scared, and scared men made fatal mistakes. "Webb," Nathan whispered into the darkness. Can you get a clean shot from your position? Not without risking that he'll drop the dynamite, Webb's voice came back. We need to get him away from the house. Nathan made his decision. Standing up slowly, he walked into the open area in front of the porch, his hands visible, but his rifle ready. Here I am, Thorne, Nathan said calmly. Let's finish this. Thorne's eyes locked onto Nathan, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Then Thorne smiled, an expression of pure malice, and raised the dynamite over his head. Goodbye, Nathan Cross, Thorne said. The shot came from Ruby's position, a clean rifle shot that took Thorne in the shoulder and spun him around. The dynamite flew from his hands, arcing through the air toward the side of the house, where it would do the least damage. Nathan dove for cover as the explosion lit up the night, the concussion wave washing over him like a physical blow. When the dust settled and his ears stopped ringing, he looked up to see Thorne on the ground, clutching his wounded shoulder and cursing in language that would have made a cavalry sergeant blush. Webb and his men had emerged from cover and were rounding up Thorne's surviving gunmen, who seemed more than happy to surrender rather than continue fighting for a wounded madman. Ruby ran to Nathan's side, her rifle smoking and her face flushed with excitement and relief. Nice shot, Nathan said, pulling his daughter into a fierce hug. You taught me to aim for the largest target, Ruby replied. His shoulder was bigger than his head. Nathan laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. It was over. The lies had been exposed, the truth had been revealed, and Cornelius Thorne would never threaten them again. As federal marshals arrived to take Thorne into custody, Nathan stood with his arm around Ruby's shoulders and watched the man who had tried to destroy their lives being loaded into a prison wagon. What happens now? Ruby asked. Nathan pulled the official pardon from his pocket and looked at it in the lamplight. For the first time in 15 years, he was a free man. No more running, no more looking over his shoulder, no more fear that the past would catch up with him. Now, Nathan said, we go home. Where's home? Ruby asked. Nathan looked at his daughter, strong, brave, wise beyond her years, and smiled. Wherever we decide to make it, he said. Together. 6 months later, Nathan Cross stood in the doorway of the small cabin he and Ruby had built together in a valley 30 miles north of their old mountain camp. The morning sun painted the peaks gold and amber, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its liquid song to the brightening sky. Ruby knelt beside the garden they had planted in the spring, carefully tending the corn and squash that would help sustain them through the coming winter. Her hands moved with the same patience and precision she brought to everything else, and Nathan felt the familiar surge of pride as he watched his daughter work. She had grown in the months since Thorne's capture, not just in height and strength but in confidence and wisdom. The frightened child who had appeared at his campfire was gone forever, replaced by a young woman who could track deer through dry leaves, negotiate with traders in 3 languages, and mend a broken harness with nothing but rawhide and determination. The corn is coming along nicely, Ruby said, without looking up from her work. We should have enough to trade for winter supplies and still have plenty left over. Nathan nodded, though he was thinking less about the corn than about the pair of moccasins Ruby was crafting in her spare time. She had learned the traditional Apache techniques from him, but had added her own innovations, subtle changes in the stitching pattern that made them both beautiful and functional. It was the first pair she had made entirely on her own, and Nathan knew she was planning to give them to him as a gift when they were finished. The thought filled him with an emotion he still struggled to name. Gratitude, perhaps, or simple love, or maybe just the deep satisfaction of knowing that the old ways would not die with him. Nathan? Ruby's voice interrupted his thoughts. Are you listening to me? Nathan smiled sheepishly. Sorry, I was thinking about something else. I was asking about the trading post, Ruby said, standing and brushing dirt from her knees. Tom Bradley sent word that he wants to meet with us next week. Something about a job opportunity, Nathan frowned. Federal Marshal Tom Bradley had become something of a friend in the months since Thorne's trial, but Nathan was wary of any job that required official involvement with the law. What kind of job? Nathan asked. Guide work, mostly. The territorial government is planning a survey of the high country, and they need someone who knows the Apache trails. Ruby's expression was carefully neutral, but Nathan could see the excitement flickering in her eyes. They specifically asked for you. Nathan considered this. 6 months ago, the idea of working for the territorial government would have been laughable. But his official pardon had changed everything, opening doors that had been closed to him for 15 years. More than that, he was beginning to understand that isolation wasn't the answer to life's problems. He and Ruby had built a good life in their hidden valley, but they were still part of a larger world, and that world occasionally needed the skills they possessed. "What do you think?" Nathan asked. "Should we take it?" Ruby's smile was radiant. "I think it would be good for us to see other people occasionally. And the money would be useful." Nathan laughed. "Since when do you worry about money? We have everything we need right here. Everything except a future," Ruby said seriously. "I won't be a child forever, Nathan. Someday I'll want to see the world beyond these mountains, maybe even start a family of my own. The skills you've taught me are valuable, but I need to learn how to use them in the wider world." Nathan felt a pang at the thought of Ruby leaving, but he recognized the wisdom in her words. She was growing up, developing her own dreams and ambitions. His job as her father wasn't to keep her safe from the world forever. It was to prepare her to thrive in it. "All right," Nathan said. "We'll tell Bradley we're interested, but we do it on our terms." Ruby's smile could have lit up the entire valley. "Thank you." As they worked together in comfortable silence, Nathan found his thoughts drifting to the letter that had arrived the week before from Webb. The bounty hunter had used the reward money from Thorne's capture to start a detective agency in Denver, and he was making good money helping people solve problems that the regular law couldn't handle. "I owe you more than I can ever repay," Webb had written. "Chasing you for 3 years taught me what real honor looks like. If you ever need anything at all, you just have to ask." It was a generous offer, and Nathan was grateful for it. But more than that, it represented something he had never expected to have again. Friendship based on mutual respect rather than shared hardship. The sound of approaching horses interrupted his reverie. Nathan's hand moved instinctively to his rifle, but Ruby held up a restraining hand. "It's Tom Bradley," she said, shading her eyes against the morning sun. "And he's alone." Nathan relaxed as he recognized the federal marshal's distinctive gray horse. Bradley had become a regular visitor to their valley, partly for official business, but mostly because he seemed to enjoy their company. "Morning, Nathan." "Ruby," Bradley called as he dismounted. "Hope you don't mind me dropping by unannounced." "You're always welcome here," Nathan replied, and meant it. Bradley was one of the few lawmen Nathan had ever met who seemed more interested in justice than in following rules. "I brought news about the survey job," Bradley said, tying his horse to the hitching post Nathan had built outside the cabin. "But first, I wanted to give you something." Bradley reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather portfolio. Inside were official documents bearing the territorial seal and signed by the governor himself. "What is this?" Nathan asked, scanning the formal language. "Your appointment as Special Deputy Marshal for Apache Affairs," Bradley said with obvious satisfaction. "It comes with a badge, a salary, and the authority to investigate crimes involving Indian tribes." Nathan stared at the documents in amazement. "I don't understand. Why would they offer this to me?" "Because you're the only man in the territory who has the trust of both the Apache people and the federal government," Bradley explained. "There are problems out there that can't be solved with cavalry charges and arrest warrants. They need someone who can build bridges instead of burning them." Ruby moved to Nathan's side, reading over his shoulder. "Papa, this is wonderful. You could help prevent the kind of misunderstandings that lead to violence." Nathan felt the weight of possibility settling on his shoulders. For 15 years, he had been defined by the violence of war and the bitterness of defeat. But this was a chance to be something more. A chance to use his knowledge and experience to heal rather than harm. "There's more," Bradley continued. "The job comes with the authority to select your own deputy, someone who knows the Apache ways as well as you do." Nathan looked at Ruby, seeing the hope shining in her eyes. She was only 11 years old, too young for official law enforcement work. But she could learn, could grow into the role. It could become the bridge between two worlds that this territory desperately needed. "I'll need time to think about it," Nathan said. "Of course," Bradley replied, "but don't think too long. The territory needs good people like you and Ruby." After Bradley left, Nathan and Ruby sat on the porch of their cabin and watched the sun climb higher into the cloudless sky. The valley spread out before them like a promise. Their garden, their livestock, the stream that provided fresh water, and the memory of lazy afternoons spent fishing its pools. "Are you afraid?" Ruby asked quietly. Nathan considered the question. "Yes," he said finally, "but not of the work itself. I'm afraid of what might happen if we don't do it. There are going to be more conflicts between the Apache and the settlers, more misunderstandings that turn into violence. Maybe we can prevent some of that," Ruby nodded thoughtfully. "Mama used to say that fear was just excitement wearing the wrong clothes." Nathan smiled, remembering Isabella's gentle wisdom. "Your mother was a remarkable woman. She would be proud of us," Ruby said with quiet confidence. "Proud of what we've built together, proud of the choice we're going to make." Nathan looked at his daughter, no longer a child, not yet a woman, but something perfectly herself, and felt his heart swell with love and gratitude. "Yes," he said, "I think she would be." As the afternoon wore on, they made their decision. They would accept Bradley's offer, would take on the responsibility of building peace in a land that had known too much war. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be dangers and setbacks along the way, but they would face those challenges together, as they had faced everything else. Father and daughter, teacher and student, two hearts beating as one, in the vast wilderness of possibility. The sun was setting behind the western peaks when Ruby finished the moccasins she had been working on for weeks. She presented them to Nathan with shy pride, and he accepted them with the reverence they deserved. "They're perfect," Nathan said, running his fingers over the intricate beadwork that decorated the soft leather. "The finest I've ever seen," Ruby beamed. "I used the pattern Grandfather taught you, but I added some of my own touches. See how the design tells the story of a warrior who becomes a father." Nathan studied the beadwork more carefully, seeing now how the traditional symbols had been woven together to create a narrative. The crossed lances of war giving way to the protective circle of family, the lonely mountain becoming the foundation for a new kind of strength. "It's beautiful," Nathan said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." As they sat together on the porch, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky, Nathan reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, he had been a man with nothing to live for except the memory of what he had lost. Now he had a daughter, a purpose and a future that stretched out before them like an uncharted trail. There would be challenges ahead. That was the nature of life in a changing world. But there would also be joy and growth and the deep satisfaction that came from work worth doing. Ruby leaned against his shoulder, comfortable in the silence that had become their natural communication. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack, and the night wind carried the scent of sage and possibility. "Ready for tomorrow?" Ruby asked. Nathan smiled, feeling the weight of the badge in his pocket and the warmth of his daughter beside him. As ready as anyone can be. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and the world turned toward dawn. In a small valley hidden among the peaks of the Colorado Territory, a father and daughter sat together and planned for a future that would be built not on the ashes of the past, but on the foundation of love, courage, and the unshakable belief that even broken things could be made whole again. Nathan Cross was no longer a man running from his past. He was a man walking toward his future, and he was not walking alone.